May 1st, 2011, Abbottabad, Pakistan. This compound is large, but it's nothing fancy. Inside, you'll find dozens of chickens, some vegetable patches, a cow, and the world's most wanted man. Only a handful of people know that Osama Bin Laden and 16 members of his family have been living here for the past 5 years. They've taken great care to be as self-sufficient and under the radar as possible. They're a tight-knit family, and every night they have intense debates about the future of Al-Qaeda, especially lately. Like always, Bin Laden goes to bed with one of his 4 wives. Tonight, it's the youngest, Amal. They're fast asleep, cuddling their 3-year-old son, when they're startled around 1 a.m. Is that a storm? Amal reaches to switch on a lamp, but Bin Laden stops her. He knows this sound. It's not a storm, it's helicopters. Bin Laden panics. The Americans are here. They found him. He's forgotten to load his AK. This won't end well for him. And another realization sets in. They are going to find his hard drives. 3 terabytes of Al-Qaeda's secrets. Nothing could be worse. He'd rather be captured and killed than to have this data exposed. Before we begin, for more background, we would like to recommend these fantastic short docs by our colleague and friend Neo on how Bin Laden was found. Also, this video is largely based on the book The Bin Laden Papers by Nellie Lahoud. Links are in the description. Now, let's dive into the incredible story behind these hard drives.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
When the U.S. Navy SEALs raided Abbottabad to capture bin Laden, they were supposed to stay for only 30 minutes or less. Most successful missions take no longer, and any delay would amplify the danger. But when they spot, quote, a shit ton of computers in the compound, the potential intelligence value is too tempting. They deviate from the plan to return ASAP. They gather up the electronics and deliver them to the CIA. Sifting through the files is a gargantuan task. Every Arabic-speaking linguist in the intelligence community is on the job. There's lots of normal stuff you might find on just about anyone's computer. Home videos, news clippings, memes, excessive amounts of pornography. Then there is the expected terrorist content, Al-Qaeda propaganda, and so on. But that's not the interesting part. On these hard drives, U.S. intelligence discovers a treasure trove of letters. The bulk of Al-Qaeda's communications were typed or handwritten, then transmitted by couriers on a SIM card. For security reasons, Bin Laden did not have internet access the whole time he was in hiding. The letters were exchanged through what Al-Qaeda called a closed circle. A courier moved between 2 intermediaries, one on Bin Laden's side and one on the side of his trusted associate in North Waziristan, a mountainous part of Pakistan bordering Afghanistan. Security measures were so stringent that the courier did not know about the letters he was transmitting, and Bin Laden never met him or knew who he actually was. Using couriers was cumbersome and dangerous, but it worked. For 10 years, Bin Laden successfully remained hidden, and the world was in the dark when it came to Al-Qaeda. Until, of course. We rely heavily on high-powered computers to produce these videos, but sometimes we might just want to work in a cafe or abroad or on the beach even. We can't take our giant desktops with us, but there is another, much cleaner solution. AnyDesk is a lightning-fast, secure, and reliable access software for seamless remote work and file sharing. It's free for personal use and supports remote video editing, 3D printing, CMS monitoring, and much more. It's easy to use for even the least tech-savvy, but powerful enough for advanced use like remote server maintenance. The clean interface makes AnyDesk a breeze for anyone to use. It's available for all platforms, from your laptop to your phone, all the way to your grandmother's Windows XP machine. If you're looking to collaborate remotely and need something fast and flexible, check it out at anydesk.com/Fern. We really do use AnyDesk regularly and can highly recommend it. Upon discovery of the hard drives, the CIA got straight to work extracting the immediate intelligence gains. What they found, they acted upon quickly. For example, the files helped them locate Al-Qaeda's chief operations officer in Pakistan's tribal regions. They killed him by a drone strike within 4 months of the Abbottabad raid. Al-Qaeda's top legal scholar was found and killed shortly after. But after these quick results, many of Al-Qaeda's secrets remained buried on these hard drives, coded in the countless letters. It would take years to grasp the content of all these communications, and help came from outside the CIA.
And what I wanted to do was actually to chronicle Al-Qaeda's history post 9/11. And I wanted to do it through the letters. Not through secondary sources, but through the letters.
This is Dr. Nellie Lahoud. She studies the evolving ideologies of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and she led a team that analyzed and contextualized the contents of Bin Laden's papers.
The declassification process began in 2012, and by 2017, the declassified files were massive. At one point, I came to realize this is where I was going to find Al-Qaeda's internal communications. And these were about 97,000 files. I was fortunate that I was able to have the support of 2 research assistants who were native Arabic speakers like me.
Lahoud and her assistants looked at all nearly 100,000 documents, and what they uncovered is astonishing. The letters reveal Bin Laden's character and Al-Qaeda's inner workings. They lay bare Bin Laden's future plans and deepest fears. They help map out the global jihadi landscape, and they offer a definitive account of Al-Qaeda's post-9/11 history, which up until then was deeply misunderstood. Tora Bora, which means black dust in Pashto, is a remote and barren part of eastern Afghanistan. Bin Laden loves this region and knows it well. It held a special place in Bin Laden's heart since the 1980s, when he made a pilgrimage from Saudi Arabia to assist the Afghan Mujahideen in the holy cause of fighting the Soviets. He helped fund the construction of cave complexes in the region and recruited fighters who contributed to the broader resistance movement. The Soviets eventually withdrew, and Bin Laden believed his contributions to be decisive. The victorious Afghan jihad inspired the formation of Al-Qaeda, which means the base of an Islamist legion that could wage jihad anywhere. At that time, Bin Laden and the Americans were on the same side, both in Tora Bora, supporting the Afghan Mujahideen in resisting a Soviet invasion. Now 14 years later, Bin Laden is cowering from them, fleeing into the same mountains that he once used as a stronghold. But the CIA are on his tracks. On December 3rd, 2001, the situation turns grim for Al-Qaeda. The Americans start bombing relentlessly. Al-Qaeda members are hiding in caves at 9,000 feet, shivering in 10 degrees below freezing. They have no access to drinking water because it's frozen. The bombs keep raining destruction. Against all odds, Bin Laden escapes the US troops, but he's not feeling celebratory. He knows that at any moment he can be killed, so he hastily draws up his will. And in his will, Bin Laden writes to his children, "Forgive me, because I have given you only a little of my time since I answered the jihad call. I have chosen a road fraught with dangers, and for this sake suffered from hardships, embitterment, betrayal, and treachery. I advise you not to work with Al-Qaeda." It's a low moment for Bin Laden, and it's not just because death is around the corner. It's also because he made a horrible mistake, and now he knows it.
What the letters reveal is that Al-Qaeda had not anticipated that the United States would launch a war in response to 9/11. At most, they thought that the United States would respond with limited airstrikes.
Al-Qaeda was completely unprepared. They didn't even have a plan A. Bin Laden made a huge miscalculation. He believed the United States was fundamentally weak, a paper tiger with no real bite. Not all jihadis suffered from this delusion. In a council shortly before 9/11, high-level jihadis and Muslim religious authorities warned Bin Laden that the Americans would attack the whole Middle East if he launched an attack on US soil. But he waved off their concerns confidently. He was certain that the United States didn't have the resources for a counterattack. Bin Laden's stated purpose of 9/11 was to serve as a decisive blow to force the United States to withdraw its military forces from Muslim-majority countries. Well, quite the opposite happened. Now Bin Laden had no choice but to acknowledge the true power of his sworn enemy. Several key Al-Qaeda members are already dead, captured or displaced into unfriendly countries. The Taliban, who has been aiding Al-Qaeda, has fallen rapidly, but it would take Bin Laden years to publicly admit his mistake. For their part, the United States also misunderstood the power of their enemy, but in their case, the opposite was true. They believed Al-Qaeda was far more powerful than it actually was. Up until bin Laden's death, Al-Qaeda was widely perceived to be the major player in the global jihadi landscape. 9/11 shocked the world, and it was assumed that only a very powerful network could harm the world's greatest superpower in such a devastating manner. Most people believed Al-Qaeda was still pulling the strings when it came to other Islamist terrorism. The Madrid and London bombings of 2004 and 2005 were falsely reported to have been orchestrated by the group. And for a while, bin Laden fed that narrative, publicly cheering on jihadis and allowing people to believe that he was calling the shots. Al-Qaeda continued to release public statements, which allowed them to project strength that they did not have. They fed the illusion that the jihadi landscape was a united front. But the papers show that the post-9/11 reality looked quite different.
So when bin Laden disappeared from the scene, we learned that he stopped communicating with his associates for about 3 years. Now, he was watching the news, he was releasing public statements, but he had no knowledge about what was happening in the world of Al-Qaeda itself because he was hiding. So between 2004 all the way to 2011, all the letters make it absolutely clear that Al-Qaeda did not have the resources and did not have the personnel to mount international terrorism.
Quote-unquote successful jihadis capable of international terrorism were in almost all cases operating independently of Al-Qaeda. From the outside, the movement appeared to be united under Al-Qaeda, but in reality, the network was riddled with internal divisions. Al-Qaeda was at constant odds with affiliate groups because of differing strategies, power struggles, and serious trust issues. Later letters show that much of Al-Qaeda's post-9/11 focus was on managing these tensions. In highly bureaucratic Al-Qaeda memos, you can tell that bin Laden's educational background is in business administration and not religious scripture. He's a hands-on boss with a tendency to micromanage, running Al-Qaeda like a failing company. He's preoccupied with the competition, with rebranding, with PR scandals, and with potential mergers. He's anxiously trying and failing to control the affiliate groups. He's afraid different strategies are tarnishing the Al-Qaeda brand.
These groups ended up focusing their attention locally, and in the process, they mounted many indiscriminate attacks that saw many Muslim casualties, and this upset bin Laden deeply. Many, if not probably all these attacks, were not authorized by bin Laden or the top leadership of Al-Qaeda. We find bin Laden and his associates remarkably calling for less terrorism rather than more terrorism out of these groups. But this isn't to kind of paint them as being, peaceful makers. They wanted the attacks of all these groups to be targeting the United States.
The United States' counterterrorism efforts didn't reflect any of this complexity. The Americans believed that Al-Qaeda was growing stronger by the day. They were fixated on Al-Qaeda as the main threat, pouring a huge amount of resources into finding bin Laden. And just after the 9/11 attacks, the Bush administration passed the authorization for the use of military force. This legislation allowed military force to be used against anyone considered to be associated with the attacks, without requiring explicit approval from Congress. If a jihadist could reasonably be linked with Al-Qaeda, then military activities in the region could be pursued more swiftly. Meanwhile, other, more threatening jihadi groups were growing in strength, outside the purview of the Americans' enormous military resources. As a result, in 2014, Al-Qaeda was overtaken by a rival jihadist group. A group that was formerly an offshoot, they had broken away, largely due to strategic disagreements. Bin Laden tried and failed to keep that group under control, but after a point, they simply stopped responding to his letters. That group is now known as ISIS. The letters reveal another fascinating delusion of bin Laden, which helps explain why he was ultimately captured. For nearly a decade, bin Laden has been on the run from the US. His entire life and the lives of his family members are focused on evading capture. It pains bin Laden that his family is stuck in hiding. The papers show that he's a caring family man who is intensely worried about the safety and well-being of his loved ones. He might be a mass murderer, but he reads his grandkids' stories every night. It's a tough life in isolation, but his careful security measures have kept him safe. At one point in 2010, bin Laden receives a letter that one of his couriers might have been captured. This would compromise everything.
But instead of really starting to pack his bag, he chose to stay where he did. Why? Bin Laden had a soft spot for his family. At that time, his wife who was detained in Iran, as well as his son, were released, and they wanted to join him.
So bin Laden's role as a kindly patriarch may have been the reason for his ultimate downfall. He was too wrapped up in his family matters to give the courier threat his full attention. But there was another reason, something completely unexpected. A world historical event. Not he nor the world at large saw it coming. Suddenly, bin Laden's obsession with security took a backseat role because his attention shifted. In December 2010, a wave of uprising thunders throughout the Arab world. People are fed up with corruption, poverty, and authoritarianism. The Arab Spring sends shockwaves through the Middle East and the rest of the world. The initially peaceful protests turn deadly. Governments are overthrown. Civil wars erupt. At first, bin Laden is overjoyed that people are demanding the removal of corrupt dictators, which he and other jihadists have been advocating for years. Bin Laden sees a power vacuum, and he plans to fill it. He's long wanted to instigate regime changes in the Arab world. After all, that was the whole point of September 11. The United States was backing authoritarian regimes in Muslim-majority countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia. The attack was meant to force them to retreat from the region. Then their puppet regimes in the Arab world would fall, and Al-Qaeda could swoop in and install Taliban-style utopias. And now the people are overthrowing these regimes themselves. What could be better? Bin Laden and his family are excitedly preparing their response. We know this from a handwritten family journal found during the Abbottabad raid. The journal recorded the conversations of bin Laden's family, leading up to the night before his death. Every day, they're having intense debates about how Al-Qaeda should navigate this new reality. There's just one problem. Al-Qaeda isn't exactly at the forefront of the protesters' demands. It seems that many people want democracy, and not a caliphate. And the situation keeps changing rapidly, so strategizing is tricky. In his last few days, bin Laden relies a lot upon his two millennial daughters to formulate a stance. Maryam and Sumaya are 19 and 21 at the time. The journal reveals them to be sharp, passionate, and willing to challenge their father. They ask him the hard questions, like, is it possible that some among the new generation will believe that political change can occur without jihad? After all, the West intervened in support of overthrowing the Libyan dictator and seems generally in favor of the uprisings. Bin Laden is stumped. At points he is almost hopeless in his confusion, one day saying, "We cannot do anything except intensify our prayers." But his daughters push him to make a statement. The political moment is too important to waste.
So the role of his daughters was remarkable, and we find in the letters by various family members that Maryam and Sumaya, to quote one letter, worked very closely with their father, and their writings were broadcast on TV, meaning that it was their work, their writings, that bin Laden had delivered in his public statement over the years. So clearly they were doing the heavy lifting at home. They were all on the same page in terms of their loyalty to jihad, their commitment to the cause for which bin Laden had spent his life doing. It was a family affair.
At the end of bin Laden's life, the papers reveal a man who is fearful, paranoid, and incapable of materializing most of his plans, large and small. He never achieves another large-scale attack on the United States.